There we go. Let's jump over to Canvas. All right, studio familiarization. A video studio is made up of two major things: people and equipment. All right, people are going to be us. We're the crew, and the crew is everything from camera operators, production assistants. There's a floor manager who manages what happens inside the studio itself. And then there's folks in a control room. Control room in our studio is just a small room right next to the studio. Walk right in, and we have all of the gear in there to control the show, switch the video, control which audio is recorded and at what levels, and the lighting. Control which lights get turned on and how bright they are. You can go and adjust dimmers or faders. We have a graphics computer in there so that we could put graphics into the show and on and on. So you've got two things: the studio itself, people work there; the control room itself, people work in there, and there's gear between the two. So let's jump out here. Let me go and make sure this works. In the studio space, what you're going to notice in a studio is above your head is a lighting grid. All right. It's simply a series of metal pipes formed in a grid-like fashion, like a tic-tac-toe game, right? And you hang lights from it. All right, that's it. Lighting grid, it's overhead. You can put it almost anywhere in any room that you make a studio, and we hang our lights off them. Back in the past, the lights used to be like our old house lights. When you turned them on, if they were on for a while, they got rather hot. All right. Nowadays, you may have these at home, most likely LED bulbs. We have LED lights in studio. You turn those on, they light up the space. They don't get hot. All right. And that's a major change. It used to be that if you wanted to create a video studio, you would not only get a space where you could go and make the actual studio, put whatever props, whatever sets you needed to do the show that you wanted to do, have the camera equipment, but you had to have major air conditioning, because when those lights came on, in the studio I worked in, it was very, very large. I think we were talking somewhere around 2,000 or 2,500 square feet of floor space, right? Completely open. The lights, we probably had somewhere in the neighborhood, not of a 100-watt light bulb. You would have lights hanging from the ceiling. The lowest brightness or wattage would be a 500-watt lamp, 500-watt lighting instrument. And they'd go up from there. So you'd have a 500-watt light, a 2,000, a 5,000-watt light. You were lighting up the space with thousands of watts of light. And with those old lights, the vast majority of the energy turned into heat, right? So the room got super hot. You had to have major, major air conditioning just to balance it out so that your talent and the crew didn't melt from all of that heat. So, lighting grid. Now let's see, I'm going to zoom back out and click on this. Yeah, it opened up a new window. All right. I went and did a little Google search, so that's what our link is. This is what we're looking at with a lighting grid. It's just a series of pipes overhead. You may have a ceiling that's 10 feet tall, 20 feet tall, whatever. Has anyone ever gone to a concert, gone to a venue, a club, a bar? Chances are you will see a lighting grid in those environments. And all it is metal piping. This one is, much more elaborate system. It's not a single pipe, but it does have a pipe where they just hang a light off of it, right? So really fairly straightforward. Here's another one in a kind of small studio space, kind of similar to the one we have at Bucks. You just have iron piping in a tic-tac-toe formation. And as you see here, they have like a C-clamp, a little clamp that's in the form of a C. You have a screw, and you tighten it onto the pipe, and you hang your light from it. All right. And there's all kinds of different lights we use, and it can get really confusing. The biggest thing that I learned after I got out of school, it was really crazy. In school, you learn about all the different lights when you take a lighting course, and they give you the ratios between using how much light on one side of a person's face to the other side of the person's face to make it look a certain way. When I got out into the world and I was working in a TV studio, there was one day when I was helping the lighting director, that's the person who's in charge of organizing and putting up lights. I was helping the lighting director. Their name was Chris. And I said, Chris, how do you know which lights to use? You know, where to put them? Like, how much power do you need? And Chris told me, it's not the light, it's the shadows. Don't worry about the lights. Aim them at the person, the subject, whatever it is you're recording, and just look at the shadows. If it's the way you want it, it's perfect. But don't get hung up on the lights themselves. And that changed everything for me. I'm not going to say I'm a, Hollywood level lighting director now, but once I stopped worrying about the lights themselves and focused on the person I was recording and said, the shadows aren't right, I've got to move things, I got to change stuff around, my productions got like 10 times better. So, lighting grid, simple metal thing. We have it set up in our studio. They're hanging from the ceiling, but in reality, you can do this anywhere. If you set up a room, I overheard when we came back from break, folks were saying, are you on Twitch? Are you a streamer? You could set up a little studio in your own home, all right, and do stuff like this. Maybe you don't want to put a grid up, but maybe you just want to put a few lights on a stand. You can make you can make your environment look fantastic. Real quick, if you ever heard the old saying from the movies, you ever hear the phrase lights, camera, action? They say lights first because that's the most important thing. You can't record a good picture unless you got lights. So we say lights, camera, because I got to turn on the lights. I got to make sure everything looks good. Then I turn on the camera. And I turn on the camera to make sure that the lights look good, make sure my subject, my talent looks good. When I turn on my camera, nowadays, I'm most likely also turning on my microphones. And then it's action, baby. Go and do the stuff you need to do. So we've got a lighting grid here. Close out this one. Then we've got studio cameras. From that slide that I had the beginning of class and that I showed during our break, we've got studio cameras, and they come in all different sizes and shapes. The classic studio camera is here, and this is kind of like the camera I worked on when I went into broadcasting. It's a big monster, and especially you've got a big box lens on the front of it. All right, these are massive. They can really reach out long distances and bring the subjects in close. You've got a big camera, a lot of controls on the back because that's where the operator is back here. We've got a view screen. It's actually a small like TV set so that you can see what you're shooting the camera at, aiming the camera at. And we can even put little lines on the screen so that if you ever watched sports at home, you know how they bring up graphics on the bottom of the screen? It's called a lower third. You can put a little line on the monitor for the camera operator to say, don't let a person's face go below this line because that's where all of our graphics show up. It's pretty cool, actually. So this is a classic studio camera, and as you see, it's on this big platform. This is called a studio pedestal. It's got this big ring. You grab it and you can move the camera on the floor, forward, back, left, and right. And if you pull up on it, you could raise the camera up in the air. And if you pull down on it, you can bring it as far down to the ground as you possibly can. Our studio pedestals give you that capability. All right. So we can raise the cameras up and pull them down as far as they go. right here on the left-hand side, you see a control handle. You've got two arms on a camera tripod and pedestal to move the camera left and right and tilt it up and down. On your left-hand side, you typically have focus control for your camera. And on the right-hand side, you have zoom controls. Now, in this particular photo, this is a zoom control. All right, you set your thumb down in the middle there. You rock it to the left and to the right, and you zoom in and you zoom out. The focus control on our studio cameras and on most of the ones I've worked with, the handle right here that you put your hand on is also the zoom control. They have a cable that runs from this handle up to the lens. And the way they work is if you were to rest your hand right on the top of this handle and you were to push your hand away to roll the handle away from you from the top so it's going counterclockwise, that's to focus the lens if someone's far away from you. And if you pull it towards you, that means the person's closer. So that was a little trick that I learned way back when, that if I get someone and I'm recording them, and I did live television work, so I would often have talent that would move around the studio. So I would get my initial focus on them, and if they walked away from the camera, I pushed my hand across the top of the control handle here, because they were moving away and my focus then moved away. If they walked towards the camera, I would pull it up towards me. So the top of my hand rolled across this in a clockwise fashion because my focus was moving closer to the lens. All right? So you'll have on the right-hand side zoom control, on the left focus control. And when we all get into studio, we're all going to get behind a camera. The first thing you want to do once you find out who you're shooting with your camera is zoom in all the way. If you've got a really big zoom lens on it, zoom into their nose, go to their eyes, right? Zoom all the way into their face, focus so they're tack sharp, and then zoom out and frame them up so they look good, right? Or however the director wanted them. But the first thing you do is you zoom in all the way, you get what's called critical focus, and then you zoom out. Video cameras and digital cinematography cameras with the proper lenses will hold their focus all throughout the zoom range. They hold their focus all throughout their range so that you don't have to change focus whether you zoom in or zoom out. Photography lenses, and we'll get into this when we're in studio, may not necessarily hold your focus. So if you're using a photography lens on a video camera, and that's the kind we have at the school, you zoom in, get your focus, and zoom out. Chances are it'll still be in focus, but you've got maybe a 60-40 chance that focus will actually be soft when you zoom out. So, but for our video cameras here, for our studio work, you always get critical focus. Get behind the camera, zoom in all the way, focus up, zoom out. If someone moves around, like I said, I would roll my left hand away from myself. If they walked away from the camera towards myself, I'd pull it towards me. If they walked towards the camera, when I'm no longer on air, and we'll talk about that in a second, when other cameras are being recorded or being broadcast, I would then, once I knew I was totally clear, zoom in, get critical focus, and zoom out again, because we always want to have sharp focus. All right, studio cameras, let's get rid of that. Studio familiarization. Here is a contemporary studio camera, and this is what we're going to be using, or similar to what we use at Bucks. This is a shoulder mount camera. This is a field video camera. News crews use this, and you see a little cutout where you would take this camera and put it on your shoulder. There would be an eyepiece mounted here typically, so you have it up on your shoulder and you'd be looking at an eyepiece mounted here as opposed to a studio viewfinder, you know, a monitor that's mounted up top. It's put on a plate that you affix the camera to. It's typically called a quick release plate because we can just move a lever and pop that camera off the pedestal. You see we have our two control arms. Here's your focus, where you'll roll your hand away if a subject moves away from you, or pull it towards you if they're coming closer to you, rather. And here's the zoom knob mounted on the other end of the stick. And it looks like this is just on a hard tripod, like a photography tripod. What you see in front of here is a teleprompter. It's just simply a monitor and a semi-transparent piece of glass. So you'll have the words that you want someone to read projected up and reflected out, so the person can see them, but the camera can still see straight through and record their image. But this is the kind of camera setup that we have at Bucks itself. We're running a Panasonic camera. It's a high-def camera, and we don't use a hard mount tripod. We have a pedestal that you can roll around the studio floor, lift up and lift down. Super simple lighting grid. We've got our cameras, the pedestal, just to show you what that is. I link out to this, and this is, the old school classic high-end television pedestal. It's a monstrosity, because these cameras are heavy. These are like 50 to 100 pounds, so you need a really beefy pedestal to hold these things up. Let me close that down. And pedestal product description. Here's kind of like the pedestal that we have at Bucks. It's a pneumatic tube. We actually pump air into it. We mount the camera system up top, and it's like a big shock absorber. You're able to move it down. When you have just the right amount of air, you can move it down and it'll stay still. You could raise it all the way up and it'll stay up there. Mounted on wheels, so you could move it around. Kind of heavy duty. Our shoulder mount cameras, with all of their equipment on them, are about 20 pounds or so. So it's kind of, it's stout, so it can hold that up. And they're like $5,500. So I think it's always important to know what this stuff costs, right? And these used to be super, super expensive. This is actually on the inexpensive side. And then I had mentioned your studio camera has a view screen. This is what you will see. Let's zoom in. Oh, here we go. Click on that. There we go. Here's a Blackmagic view screen. Blackmagic is one of the many companies that create gear for video production work. What you're seeing in the camera gets put up on this screen. This particular one reads out what the camera is set at. It's 1080p. It's a high definition camera. It looks like it's recording at 23.98 frames per second. Video is 30 frames a second. All right, so television, classic stuff, if you watch local CBS, NBC, ABC, all that stuff, it's going to be 30 frames a second. Filmmaking is at 24 frames a second, and virtually all modern cameras can switch between them. 23.98 is a film frame rate that's meant to be broadcast. And then you've got your other camera settings here. Color temperature, 6500K. Audio standard, it's set at 12 dB, minus 12 dB, etc., etc. And here's a little histogram, lets you know what the exposure's set at. And I guess this is an audio readout, so you know how strong your audio is. So, whoops, going the wrong way. So these are different viewfinders that you can get, right, that you could buy for your cameras. Tally light is simply on the back side of your view screen. On the top of your camera, there's going to be a little light that will turn on when you're in a studio setup to let the talent know that this is the camera they should speak to. They should turn to, talk to, whatever. So a tally light comes on to let the talent know that that camera is active and they should play to it. And when that camera is no longer active, the light goes out. That's all controlled by the control room. When you're working on the camera, when you're operating it, you'll see a smaller version of the light on your side, so you know that your camera's active. That way, you know, if the director switches to you and forgets to say, hey, camera 2, you're on, you'll see that light come on, because otherwise you might have said like, oh, this is a boring shot, I'm going to go find something better. Or you might decide, I'm going to get critical focus once more, I'm going to zoom in. If the light's on, you're live, you're being recorded, you're being broadcast. You don't do anything unless the director tells you to. All right, so that's how that works. Tally lights. Intercom headset. Show you these. Intercoms, we've got field intercoms like this, where they're wireless and they just go away, ad. They're wireless and they transmit back and forth to one another. You put them on and your director can talk to you. You can talk to the director. You could talk to one another. The important thing about intercoms are we wear them because we don't want our voices recorded in the show. So whenever we talk in them, we whisper so that none of the open microphones in the studio pick us up. The other important feature on this is the director usually has a special headset or a special control box that if people are talking, you know, when you get used to a show, a project you're working on, typically the crew will start chatting amongst themselves. If the director needs to get everyone's attention, they'll either have a special headset with a button or a control box with a button where they could kill everyone's mics and force them to hear what the director needs to say. Each of you will be in the producer-director seat in the control room. Each of you will have the kill switch, all right? So that you can go and tell everybody, I've got something important to say, be quiet. The one thing that you need to know about that power is don't be afraid to use it. When you're in the control room, when you're producing or directing a show, you're ultimately responsible for it. So if you need people to listen to you, hit the kill switch, shut off their mics, and say what you need to say. All right, that's just one example of headsets. There's all different kinds of wireless and wired headsets. We run wired headsets, so there'll actually be a cable going to them from the camera to your headset. Same thing in the control room. And we have, as I had mentioned, we also have wireless ones that you can use in studio if need be, or you could take them out into the field. All right, so we've got intercoms. Last thing in a studio is audio. I mentioned with the headsets that you don't want to have your voice recorded on the show. Well, that means there's microphones in studio. So in studio, what we have and what many studios have is an audio snake. What it is a little box right here. Every time I go over it, it's going to zoom in. That has connectors that you plug your microphones in. And it's a single cable that runs from this box into the control room, where we then have all of these cable ends that we plug into our audio mixer. So it just makes it easier to run cables into the studio. So you have an audio snake like this, and they make them with just 4 connections, 8 connections, 12, almost whatever you need. And they come in 25, 50, 100, 200 feet lengths, right? So you could get whatever it is you might need for your particular situation. And then I just linked here to wireless microphones. We have both wired mics and wireless. We typically use wireless because it gives the talent the most freedom. You have a receiver, and then the microphone itself is a transmitter. So here we have handheld microphones. You just turn it on, you turn on the receiver, and they're paired. Like one microphone will only be received by its matching receiver. In our studio, we have, if I remember now, 5 wireless microphones, and then we have up to 8 wired mics. So, and the wireless microphones we use are lavaliers. They'll clip on your lapel, so it's less intrusive. You let the talent be able to move their arms and gesticulate. All right. So that's everything in the studio space. All right. So you've got a lot of different capabilities in there. Lighting grid, lights, of course, cameras, they sit on a pedestal. You operate them through the two control handles, and you have a view screen that you're able to look at, tally lights to let the talent know if they're on air or not, intercoms so that you could talk to the control room and the control room can talk to you. And then finally, we have wireless microphones, or you could run a wired microphone through what's called an audio snake.